I'd regard it as a redirection of Russian military efforts. There may be lots of reasons why Putin felt that it was advantageous at this point to give Donald Trump something he can declare victory over, which is something called a ceasefire.
Let's now connect with Ambassador John Bolton, former U.S. Security and National Advisor and Ambassador to the UN. Good evening to you, John.
Good evening. Thanks for having me.
Who's come out better in this ceasefire deal that's been agreed by Vladimir Putin and Donald Trump? Trump or Putin?
Well, based on what we know from the two statements that you've just gone over, I think Putin is a substantial winner. But I think the real lesson is that it shows just how far Trump is prepared to lean in Russia's direction. I do think that he will declare this a victory, regardless of how much he actually accomplished. And he listened to Putin for a long time during this conversation, I'm sure, making his case about why all military assistance needed to be cut off to Ukraine to ensure the ultimate agreement would work. And that's Russian propaganda that will be hard to pull back.
Why has Donald Trump agreed to that? Because that is significant. It is in the readout from the Kremlin. It is not in the readout from the White House that one of the conditions, Russia's conditions, is, and I'll read out the exact wording, the complete cessation of foreign military aid and the provision of intelligence information to Kyiv. That means absolutely no Western support to Kyiv at all during this ceasefire.
Yeah, I don't know that it necessarily means they're saying Trump agreed to it, but you didn't hear anything about it in the American statement, which means that he may have or he may not have. But what's important here is that to show how Putin manipulates Trump, he picked something that Trump has already done. Trump did suspend American assistance, including intelligence assistance, after the debacle in the Oval Office a couple of weeks ago. So he's already used to the idea. And I'm sure now we'll see him try and get the Europeans used to the idea.
Well, of course, Trump reinstated both intelligence and military support to Ukraine, only now potentially to have to take it away again. And you have to wonder, look, from your perspective, John, here we've got a clear disconnect, something that does not suit European nations who've been supporting Ukraine in their war. They have ploughed billions of pounds. And yes, I know the US has been the main contributor in terms of cash, in terms of money, but we know that countries within NATO, European countries, are stepping up their defensive support, the amount of money they're going to spend and give towards Ukraine. How do we think Western leaders should respond to what they've heard of this deal brokered between Vladimir Putin and Donald Trump today?
Well, I think the question for Europeans is, assuming Trump cuts off American assistance permanently, can Europeans match the equivalent in supplying weapons and ammunition to what Trump would have cut off? Because if they can, then I think Ukraine should continue the struggle. I've thought from the first I heard of it that agreeing to a ceasefire from Ukraine's point of view is a mistake. That is the path to partitioning the country, perhaps for a long, long time. But that's what Trump wanted. That's what he forced on Zelensky,
so
because
are you
Zelensky had to get that assistance turned back on.
Yeah. Are you saying Western leaders, if they've got the money to back it up, should encourage Ukraine to step away from any previously brokered ceasefire deal with the United States? Because the Russians have, in effect, rejected that deal. And so come up with their own.
Say, honestly, that deal's off the table. I mean, the only way that you're really going to get to a ceasefire in any event is direct negotiations between Ukraine and Russia. I mean, among other things, Putin actually made a valid point the other day. You can't have a ceasefire that isn't regulated by the parties themselves. When does it begin? What happens for troops who are already engaged? What are the withdrawal points? How do you monitor the ceasefire? How do you resolve difficulties? That's what combatant parties normally work out. Now, this benefits Putin because it buys him more time. What do you think Ukraine should do in light of what we've heard was agreed on the phone today between Trump and Putin? Well, I think they've got to decide together with Europe whether they can continue to fight and fight effectively, because right now, despite the horrible cost in human terms to Russia of this 3-year war, the Kremlin has roughly doubled the amount of Ukrainian territory it held after the 2014 invasion. So given that Russia's aim, which Putin has stated repeatedly for 20 years, that he wants to reincorporate Ukraine into Russia, it would be a mistake to think that any settlement that's reached with Russia will be an end to the conflict. It will simply be setting the stage for Russia's preparation for the third invasion. So why stop now and give Russia the chance to regroup?
And I suppose the other thing to consider is that under the terms of this ceasefire, Vladimir Putin can continue with his forces to advance the front line. He just needs to avoid, well, it's either energy infrastructure or energy and infrastructure, depending on whose wording of the readout of the call between Putin and Trump you want to take a look at here. But not only would there be a halt to Western aid into Ukraine, effectively Putin can keep fighting. And this is at a point where, certainly from the Ukrainian side, they are struggling on the front line. They've been pulling their forces back in Kursk, an area of Russia that they've occupied. They've been having a lot of success with direct hits, drone hits on Russian oil facilities. But one thing they're not doing particularly well at the moment is ground warfare. And this effectively hands Vladimir Putin a pass, does it not, John Bolton? Surely we have to consider that actually under this ceasefire deal, Vladimir Putin could well take more land in Ukraine.
Sure, that's why it's not a ceasefire. I mean, maybe it's good for energy and infrastructure. It's pretty bad if you're a Ukrainian frontline soldier.
So you would not describe this as a ceasefire?
No, I'd regard it as a redirection of Russian military efforts. There may be lots of reasons why Putin felt that it was advantageous at this point to give Donald Trump something he can declare victory over, which is something called a ceasefire, but which really isn't. This, again, is a measure of Putin's ability to manipulate Trump, to give him a victory rhetorically, but really not change the situation on the battlefield very much. The direction of the momentum on the battlefield today is slightly, very slightly in Russia's direction, and that's what Putin wants to continue, not just in Kursk, but along other areas of the front line in Ukraine.
Why has Donald Trump been so open to manipulation? That is the word that you've used. Why has he been so open to manipulation by Vladimir Putin?
Because he thinks Putin is his friend, and
but what is in it for him?
Many times said that relations between two countries are determined by the personal relationships of their leaders, which is ridiculous. Personal relations have their role, but that's not what Vladimir Putin thinks. He thinks Trump is an easy mark, and he's a pliable person that Putin is taking advantage of. What's in it for Trump? He wants the Nobel Peace Prize. And he's irritated and has been for years that Barack Obama got it in 2009 for doing not much of anything except showing up to work every day in his first year as president. And Trump wants one, too.
Does this look like peace to you, John Bolton?
No, it doesn't. It looks to me like a continued Russian aggression.
Look, thanks for being with us. Really appreciate it. Ambassador John Bolton there, who was a former US National Security Advisor, ambassador to the UN. Glad to speak to you. Good to spend some time with you. Thank you.